Dennis Walsh wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the broken fence post. Something had been getting into his property for 3 nights straight. The grain supplies were disappearing faster than usual, and strange noises echoed from the old barn after sunset. At first he thought wild animals were causing trouble, but wild animals did not leave scorch marks on wooden beams. He picked up his flashlight and walked toward the barn. The morning sun had not risen yet, and the air felt cold against his skin. His boots crunched on the gravel path. The barn door hung slightly open, which was odd because he always locked it before bed. Dennis pushed it wider and stepped inside. Heat hit him immediately. The barn felt like a furnace even though winter had just begun on Havens Ridge. Dennis pointed his flashlight toward the hayloft above. 2 golden eyes stared back at him. Then 4 more. Then 8. Then 12. His heart jumped into his throat. 6 creatures huddled together in the corner of the loft. They were small, about the size of large dogs, with scales that shimmered in the flashlight beam. Their bodies glowed faintly with internal light, creating patterns across their crystalline skin. Wings folded against their backs. Long necks curved protectively around each other. Baby dragons. No, not dragons. Dracovians. Dennis had seen pictures of them before years ago when he worked as a xenobiologist. But pictures did not capture the reality of standing 3 meters away from 6 alien children who should not be on his farm. Dracovians were one of the rarest species in the galaxy. They were powerful, ancient, and extremely protective of their young. Finding their babies alone was impossible. Finding them hiding in a human barn was beyond impossible. The smallest one whimpered. The sound cut through Dennis like a knife. It was the sound of fear, of hunger, of desperate loneliness. He knew that sound. He had heard it in his own voice years ago when the transport accident took his wife and 2 children from him. Dennis lowered his flashlight so the beam did not blind them. He spoke softly in the common galactic language that most species understood. Hey there. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. The largest of the 6, with scales that looked like frost patterns, lifted its head. Its eyes studied Dennis carefully. Then it made a clicking sound in its throat. The others stirred, watching him with a mix of curiosity and terror. Dennis climbed the ladder slowly, keeping his movements gentle and predictable. When he reached the loft, he sat down several feet away from them and placed the flashlight beside him. The creatures pressed closer together. Their bodies trembled. You're hungry, aren't you? Dennis said. And cold, even though you're making all this heat. You've been alone for a while. The frost-scaled one tilted its head. For a moment, Dennis felt something strange in his mind. Not words exactly, but feelings. Sadness, fear, loss. The sensation vanished as quickly as it came, but it left him shaken. Dracovians were telepathic. These babies were trying to communicate the only way they knew how. Dennis stood slowly and backed toward the ladder. I'll get you something to eat. Stay here. I'll be right back. He hurried to his storage shed and gathered supplies. Dried meat, grain supplements, water containers. He had no idea what baby Dracovians ate, but they were clearly starving. When he returned to the barn, all 6 pairs of eyes locked onto the food in his arms. Dennis laid everything out on the loft floor and stepped back. The smallest one crept forward first, sniffing cautiously. Then it tore into the dried meat with desperate hunger. The others followed, creating a feeding frenzy that would have been frightening if they were not so obviously malnourished. Their ribs showed through their scales. Their wings looked thin and fragile. While they ate, Dennis studied them more carefully. Each one had different coloring. Frost patterns on the largest, deep red on another, copper tones on a third, silver shimmer on the 4th, shadow dark on the 5th, and pale dawn colors on the smallest. They moved with intelligence, taking turns at the water, making sure the weakest ate first. These were not simple animals. They were children. The question burned in his mind. Where was their mother? Dracovian parents never left their young. It was against every instinct of their species. Something terrible must have happened. Dennis heard a vehicle approaching outside. He froze. Through the barn window, he saw the colonial administrator's transport pulling up to his house. Helen Brody did monthly inspections of all farms in the region. He had forgotten she was coming today. Stay quiet, Dennis whispered to the hatchlings. Don't make any noise. He climbed down the ladder and closed the loft hatch, then walked outside to meet Helen. She stepped out of her transport with a data pad in hand. Helen was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Dennis, she said with a professional smile. Ready for inspection? Of course, Dennis replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Though I should warn you, I've had some pest problems in the barn. Might be a bit messy in there. Helen nodded and made a note on her pad. I'll check the house first then. Dennis guided her through his home, answering questions about crop yields and equipment maintenance. His mind raced the entire time. If Helen discovered the Dracovians, everything would spiral out of control. Authorities would swarm the farm. The babies would be taken away. And something told Dennis they were hiding for a reason. Someone had hurt them or their mother. Someone might still be looking for them. After inspecting the house, Helen moved toward the barn. Dennis followed, his pulse hammering. She pushed open the door and wrinkled her nose at the heat. That's quite warm in here, she said. Your heating system malfunction? Must be, Dennis lied. I'll get it checked. Helen walked through the lower level, examining his equipment and supplies. Above them, Dennis heard a faint scraping sound. One of the hatchlings was moving. Helen stopped and looked up. What was that? Old barn, Dennis said quickly. Settling beams. Happens all the time. Helen seemed satisfied with the answer. She finished her notes and headed for the door. Everything looks good, Dennis. I'll see you next month. Dennis watched her transport disappear down the road. Only when she was completely out of sight did he release the breath he had been holding. He returned to the loft where 6 pairs of worried eyes greeted him. The frost-scaled one approached him slowly. It pressed its head against his hand. That strange feeling flooded Dennis's mind again, stronger this time. He saw flashes of memory that were not his own. A large Dracovian with elegant scales and kind eyes. A spacecraft interior. Uniformed figures moving with weapons, screams, terror, blood. Dennis pulled his hand back, gasping. The hatchling looked at him with desperate pleading in its expression. It was showing him what happened. Their mother had been attacked, murdered. These babies were not just lost. They were refugees. They were witnesses. And whoever killed their mother might still be hunting them. Dennis sat down heavily on the hay. 6 orphaned alien children stared at him, trusting him with their lives. He thought of his own children, gone too soon. He thought of his wife, who always said he had too much love in his heart to ever stop caring. All right, Dennis said softly. You can stay. I'll keep you safe. I promise. The smallest one, the dawn-colored hatchling, crawled into his lap and curled up there. The others moved closer, forming a protective circle around him. In that moment, Dennis Walsh made a choice that would change everything. He would not report them. He would not hand them over to authorities who might include their mother's killers. He would protect them no matter what it cost. The galaxy could wait. These children needed a father. 3 days passed before Dennis allowed himself to think about anything beyond immediate survival. The hatchlings needed constant care. They ate enormous amounts of food, which forced Dennis to make careful trips to neighboring farms to buy extra supplies without raising suspicion. They needed warmth, though they generated plenty of heat themselves. Most importantly, they needed comfort. Every time one of them slept, nightmares came. Dennis would wake to distressed chirping sounds and rush to the barn to calm them down. He started naming them based on their scale colors. Frost for the largest with the icy blue patterns, ruby for the deep red one, copper for the bronze-scaled hatchling, silver for the one that shimmered like starlight, shadow for the dark gray one that preferred hiding in corners, dawn for the smallest with the pale pink and gold coloring. Dawn had become particularly attached to Dennis. The little one followed him everywhere in the barn, making worried sounds whenever he climbed down the ladder. The others were more cautious, but they had stopped trembling when he entered the loft. That felt like progress. On the 4th morning, Dennis sat at his kitchen table with a cup of bitter coffee and a secure communication device he had not used in 5 years. His hand shook as he entered the contact code for Dr. Yuki Sato, his former colleague from his xenobiology days. If anyone could help him understand what was happening, it was Yuki. The device beeped twice before a face appeared on the small screen. Yuki looked older now, with more gray in her black hair and deeper lines around her eyes. She blinked in surprise. Dennis, is that really you? I thought you had disappeared into farming permanently. I need your help, Yuki. Something impossible is happening and I have no one else to ask. Yuki's expression turned serious. What kind of impossible? Dennis took a breath. If I told you I had 6 Dracovian hatchlings hiding in my barn, what would you say? The silence stretched for several seconds. Yuki leaned closer to her screen. I would say you're either joking or you've stumbled into the biggest crisis in current galactic politics. I'm not joking. Show me. Dennis carried the device to the barn. The hatchlings had learned to recognize his footsteps and no longer hid when he entered. They looked up from their breakfast, bits of dried meat hanging from their mouths. Dawn chirped happily and bounded over to him. Yuki's face went pale. Those are Ambassador Kesavara's children. Who? Dennis, where have you been living? Under a rock? Ambassador Kesavara was one of the most important diplomats in the galaxy. She was mediating a treaty between three species that have been on the edge of war for decades. 3 weeks ago, she was supposed to return to the Dracovian homeworld with her 6 children. Her ship sent a routine message saying she had arrived safely. But then nothing. No contact. The Dracovian Council has been searching everywhere, but they found no trace of her or the hatchlings. Dennis felt his stomach drop. They said she arrived safely? That's what the official reports claim. But clearly she didn't make it home. Yuki studied the hatchlings through the screen. How did they end up on your farm? I found them hiding in my barn, starving, terrified. One of them showed me a memory. Their mother was attacked, killed, by people in uniforms. Yuki's expression darkened. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Dennis, this isn't just a tragedy. This is murder. Assassination. If Ambassador Kesavara is dead, the treaty she was working on will fail. 3 entire species might go to war. And if her children die too, the Dracovian Council will demand justice that could tear apart half the galaxy. Why would someone kill her and her children? Because peace isn't profitable for everyone. The collective gains power through conflict. The hierarchy maintains control through division. The trade sovereign makes money from weapons and desperate markets. Any of them could have hired assassins. Or all of them working together. Dennis looked at the 6 hatchlings playing with empty water containers. They seemed so innocent, so vulnerable. He could not imagine anyone wanting to hurt them. What do I do, Yuki? You hide them. You keep them alive. And you don't trust anyone, especially not galactic enforcement. If the assassins were professional enough to fake arrival messages and cover their tracks, they have people everywhere. The moment you report this officially, word will spread. The killers will come to finish the job. I can't fight trained assassins. You don't have to fight them. You just have to keep the hatchlings hidden until I can gather evidence and figure out who we can actually trust. Give me some time to investigate quietly. Can you manage that? Dennis thought about Helen's inspection, about how close he had come to being discovered. How much time? A week, maybe 2. I'll work fast. These babies need more than I can give them. I'm just a farmer. I don't know anything about raising Dracovians. Yuki smiled slightly. You know more than you think. You were one of the best xenobiologists I ever worked with. And more importantly, those hatchlings trust you. Look at them, Dennis. They're not acting like traumatized orphans anymore. They're acting like children with a parent. Dennis glanced down at Dawn, who had curled up on his boot. The little one's scales glowed softly with contentment. Frost watched him from across the loft with an expression that almost looked grateful. Maybe Yuki was right. Okay, Dennis said. I'll keep them safe. But you need to find out what happened to their mother. These children deserve to know the truth. I promise I'll try. And Dennis, be careful. If enforcement comes searching, don't resist. Just play the confused farmer. Hide the hatchlings, but don't make yourself a target. The communication ended. Dennis sat in the hay surrounded by 6 alien children who depended entirely on him. The weight of responsibility pressed down like a physical thing. These were not just any children. They were the future of an entire species' bloodline. They were the key to peace or war. They were witnesses to murder, and they were his to protect. Over the next several days, Dennis developed a routine. He woke before dawn to feed the hatchlings and check their health. Frost had started showing leadership qualities, organizing the others during play and making sure everyone ate properly. Ruby was curious about everything, constantly investigating new objects Dennis brought to the loft. Copper had a mischievous personality, hiding things and pouncing on her siblings. Silver was the thoughtful one, watching and learning before trying anything new. Shadow remained nervous but had stopped fleeing whenever Dennis approached. Dawn rarely left his side. The telepathic connection between them grew stronger. Dennis could feel their emotions now, even when they were not deliberately sharing memories. Joy when they played, sadness when they remembered their mother, fear when unfamiliar sounds reached the barn, and increasingly affection directed at him. He began teaching them basic things: how to be quiet when vehicles approached, how to hide their glow by wrapping in dark blankets, how to move without making noise on the wooden floors. They learned quickly, understanding the danger even if they could not fully comprehend why they were in danger. On the 8th day, Dennis was repairing equipment in his workshop when he heard vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles. He rushed to the window and saw 3 enforcement transports pulling up to his property. His blood went cold. An officer stepped out first, tall and broad-shouldered with cold eyes. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Ford. 24 armed personnel followed him, spreading out across the property with scanning equipment. "Mr. Walsh," Ford said with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "we're conducting searches of all properties in this sector, looking for dangerous alien life forms that may have entered the colony illegally. You understand, I'm sure? Just a routine check. We'll need to search your entire property, including all buildings." Dennis forced himself to stay calm. "Of course. I have nothing to hide." But as he watched Ford's eyes scan his farm with predatory focus, Dennis realized something terrifying. This was not a routine search. Ford was not looking for generic illegal aliens. He was looking specifically for the hatchlings, and he seemed to know exactly where to search. In the barn, 6 baby Dracovians sensed their guardian's fear and pressed deeper into their hiding spots. The hunters had arrived. The only question was whether Dennis could protect his new family long enough for help to come. The game of cat and mouse had begun, and the stakes could not be higher. Lieutenant Ford walked across Dennis's property like he owned it. His scanning equipment swept back and forth, searching for heat signatures and biological markers. The other enforcement officers spread out in a wide pattern, checking every shed, every storage container, every possible hiding place. Dennis followed Ford closely, trying not to appear nervous. "You live alone out here?" Ford asked without looking at him. "Yes. My family passed away several years ago." "That must be lonely. Big property for one person to manage." "I prefer the quiet." Ford stopped near the barn and tilted his head. "This building seems unusually warm. Your heating system having problems? Old insulation. Traps heat during the day." It was a weak lie, and Ford's expression suggested he knew it. The lieutenant gestured to 2 of his officers. "Search that barn thoroughly. Check the loft, the support beams everywhere." Dennis's heart hammered as the officers entered his barn. He had hidden the hatchlings in a space beneath the floorboards that morning, a cramped area he had discovered while repairing damaged wood. The space was barely large enough for all 6 of them. They had to stay absolutely silent and completely still. One sound, one movement, and they would be found. He felt their fear through the telepathic bond. It washed over him in waves, making it hard to breathe. Dawn was terrified, sending him mental images of the people who had killed her mother. Shadow was on the edge of panic. Even Frost, the brave leader, struggled to keep calm. Dennis tried to send them reassurance, though he had no idea if they could feel his emotions the way he felt theirs. "Stay quiet, stay hidden, trust me." The officers climbed into the loft and began tearing through hay bales. They moved methodically, checking every corner. One of them pulled out a thermal scanner and swept it across the floor. Dennis watched the device's screen over the officer's shoulder. 6 bright spots glowed beneath the floorboards. "Sir," the officer called down to Ford. "I'm getting readings, heat signatures, multiple sources." Ford climbed the ladder with surprising speed for his size. He studied the scanner, then looked at the floorboards. "Tear it up," Dennis stepped forward. "Wait, that's just old heating pipes running under there. They're sealed, but they still carry residual warmth from when this place had a proper heating system." Ford's cold eyes fixed on him. "Then you won't mind if we check?" 2 officers started prying up floorboards with crowbars. The wood creaked and groaned. Dennis felt panic spike through the telepathic bond. The hatchlings were seconds away from discovery. He had to do something. "Actually," Dennis said quickly, "I just remembered something. I saw some unusual tracks near the south field yesterday. Large animal prints. Might be what you're looking for." Ford paused. "What kind of prints?" "I don't know, but they were big." Headed toward the forest, it was another weak lie. Ford studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "Rodriguez, take a team and check the south field. I'll finish here." Half the enforcement team departed. Ford turned back to the floorboards. "Continue." The officers resumed their work. Another board came up. Then another. They were 3 boards away from the hiding space now. 2 boards. One board. An explosion of sound erupted from Dennis's workshop. Alarms blared. Equipment crashed. Every vehicle's horn started blowing simultaneously. Ford and his team rushed toward the noise, weapons drawn. Helen Brody stepped out from behind Dennis's house holding a small remote device. She walked calmly to where Dennis stood and spoke quietly. I triggered every alarm system on your property. You have maybe 2 minutes before they realize it's a distraction. Get those hatchlings somewhere safer now. Helen, what are you doing here? Saving your life, apparently. I've been investigating these enforcement teams for 2 weeks. They're not legitimate. Ford is trade sovereign intelligence, not real enforcement. He's here to eliminate witnesses, not protect anyone. Move, Dennis. We don't have time. Dennis rushed to the hiding space and pulled away the remaining boards. 6 frightened hatchlings stared up at him from the darkness. Come on, quickly, follow me. He led them out through a back door Helen had opened into a drainage tunnel that ran beneath his property. It was dark and cramped, but it led to an old storm shelter 200 meters from the main barn. The hatchlings moved as quietly as possible, their scales dimmed to avoid giving off light. When they reached the shelter, Dennis pushed them inside and sealed the entrance. Stay here. Don't make any sound. I'll come back for you. Frost touched his hand with her snout, sending a pulse of trust through their bond. Then the hatchlings disappeared into the shelter's darkness. Dennis and Helen returned to the farm just as Ford's team finished checking the workshop. The lieutenant's face was dark with anger. False alarm, Ford said flatly. Equipment malfunction. These old farms, Helen said with a pleasant smile. Always something breaking down. Did you find what you were looking for in the barn? Not yet, Ford gestured to his team. Finish checking under those floorboards. The officers resumed their work. When they finally pulled up the last board, they found nothing but old pipes and dirt. Ford stared at the empty space for a long time. Then he looked directly at Dennis. Where are they? Where are what? You know exactly what I'm talking about, Mr. Walsh. This farm shows signs of large animals, unusual heat patterns, missing food supplies, and you're acting like a man with something to hide. Dennis met his gaze. I'm acting like a man who doesn't appreciate armed strangers tearing apart his property without a proper warrant. Ford stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I have 6 targets to eliminate. My orders are clear. If I find out you're hiding them, you become a target too. Is that what you want? To die protecting aliens? Helen moved between them. Lieutenant Ford, I'm the colonial administrator for this sector. If you have concerns about Mr. Walsh's property, file a formal complaint. Until then, I think you've searched enough for one day. Ford's jaw tightened, but he knew he could not push further without revealing his true purpose. We'll be back, with proper authority next time. The enforcement team loaded into their transports and departed. Dennis and Helen watched until they disappeared down the road. Only then did Helen turn to him with a serious expression. They'll return tomorrow with deeper scanning equipment. Maybe even tonight. You can't keep the hatchlings here anymore. Where else can they go? They're too young to survive in the wild, too recognizable to hide in town. And I don't know who to trust. You trust me, and I trust my instincts about people. Ford isn't the only one investigating Ambassador Kesivara's disappearance. There are others, legitimate investigators who suspect foul play, but they're moving slowly, gathering evidence. They won't act in time to save those children. Dennis felt exhaustion crash over him. I'm just a farmer, Helen. I don't know how to fight intelligence operatives. I don't know how to protect them against professionals. No, but you know how to care for them. You know how to make them feel safe. That's more valuable than you realize. The question is, are you willing to go further, to make yourself a target? Because that's what happens next. Dennis thought about the 6 hatchlings huddled in the storm shelter. He thought about Dawn's trust, Frost's courage, Ruby's curiosity. He thought about his own children lost years ago. He thought about his wife, who always said that love meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. I'm already a target, Dennis said quietly, the moment I decided to hide them. So yes, I'll go further. Whatever it takes, Helen nodded slowly. Then we need a plan. Ford will return with everything he has. We need to be ready. They spent the next several hours preparing. Helen contacted people she trusted in colonial defense. Dennis reinforced the storm shelter and gathered supplies. When night fell, he brought the hatchlings food and water, stroking each one's head and reassuring them through the telepathic bond. I won't let them hurt you, he whispered. I promise. Frost pressed her head against his chest. The other 5 gathered around him in the darkness. For a brief moment, they were just a family seeking comfort in a dangerous world. Species did not matter. Politics did not matter. Only the bond between a guardian and those he had sworn to protect. Outside the shelter, vehicles approached in the distance. Ford was returning, just as Helen predicted, but this time Dennis was ready. This time he was not alone. The battle for 6 small lives was about to begin. Dennis made a choice that would either save 6 lives or doom them all. He activated his communication device and set it to broadcast on every official galactic channel simultaneously. Then he carried it down to the storm shelter where the hatchlings waited in darkness. "What I'm about to do will bring everyone here," Dennis told them. "The good and the bad. But hiding isn't working anymore. Ford knows you're here somewhere. He'll tear apart this entire farm until he finds you. Our only chance is to make this so public that he can't finish what he started without the whole galaxy watching." Frost tilted her head, understanding flickering in her golden eyes. The other 5 moved closer, forming their protective circle. Dennis activated the broadcast and pointed the device's camera at the hatchlings. "My name is Dennis Walsh. I'm a farmer on Haven's Ridge Colony. 3 weeks ago, I found 6 Dracovian hatchlings hiding in my barn. They were starving, terrified, and alone. I later learned they are the children of Ambassador Kesavara, who was reported to have returned safely to the Dracovian homeworld." That report was a lie. Ambassador Kesavara was murdered. Her children saw it happen. The people who killed her are now hunting these babies to eliminate witnesses. One of those people is Lieutenant Ford of Galactic Enforcement, who is currently on my property. I'm broadcasting this message because these children deserve to live. The galaxy deserves to know the truth, and I will not let assassins finish what they started. Dennis ended the recording and sent it across every channel he could access. Within seconds, the message began spreading through galactic networks. Within minutes, it would reach billions of viewers. There was no taking it back now. He climbed out of the shelter just as Ford's transport surrounded his property. This time, the lieutenant brought twice as many personnel. They moved with military precision, weapons raised. Ford himself walked straight toward Dennis with murder in his eyes. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, farmer." "No," Dennis said calmly. "I just made it impossible for you to kill these children quietly. The whole galaxy is watching now. If they die, everyone will know you did it." Ford's hand moved toward his weapon. Then he stopped. His communication device was lighting up with incoming messages. Every news organization in the galaxy was trying to contact him. His superiors were demanding explanations. The trade sovereign government was issuing denials. Helen Brody's voice crackled over loudspeakers Dennis had hidden around the property. "Lieutenant Ford, this is Colonial Administrator Helen Brody. I have contacted legitimate galactic enforcement. Real investigators are en route to Haven's Ridge. They'll arrive within the hour. I strongly suggest you stand down and prepare to answer questions about your mission here." Ford's face went red with rage. "You have no idea what you've done. That treaty Ambassador Kesavara was working on, it would have crippled 3 economies. Millions would have lost their livelihoods. She was going to sacrifice entire populations for her vision of peace. Someone had to stop her. So you killed her," Dennis said. "And you tried to kill her children. They saw too much. They're telepathic. The moment they mature enough to share detailed memories with the Dracovian Council, they'll expose everyone involved. This wasn't personal. It was necessary. Their children, their political liabilities." Ford raised his weapon. His team did the same, forming a firing line. Dennis stood his ground, knowing he was about to die. He felt the hatchlings' terror spike through their bond. They were trying to reach him, to protect him, but Helen had sealed the shelter from the inside. Then the sky split open with light. 3 massive Dracovian vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above Dennis's farm. They were magnificent, covered in scales like their creators, bristling with defensive systems. The largest vessel descended until it hovered 50 meters above the ground, creating wind that flattened crops and rattled buildings. A voice boomed from the ship's communication system, speaking in the ancient Dracovian language that Dennis's translator could barely interpret. "Lower your weapons immediately. The Dracovian Council has jurisdiction here. Any aggression toward the hatchlings or their guardian will be met with overwhelming force." Ford's team lowered their weapons. They had no choice. 3 Dracovian warships could reduce the entire colony to ash in seconds. Ford himself stared at the ships with hatred, but he holstered his weapon. The largest vessel landed in Dennis's field. A door opened and 3 Dracovian adults emerged. They were massive, easily 4 times the size of the hatchlings, with scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of color and light. Their presence radiated power and ancient wisdom. These were matriarchs, the leaders of Dracovian society. The eldest matriarch approached Dennis. Her scales were deep purple with silver edges, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. When she spoke, her voice resonated in both sound and telepathy. "You are the human who protected our young." "Yes, matriarch. They're safe. They're in a shelter beneath the ground." "Show us." Dennis led the 3 matriarchs to the storm shelter. He opened the entrance and called down softly, "It's okay. You can come out now. Your people are here." 6 small heads appeared in the opening. When they saw the matriarchs, they exploded out of the shelter with cries of joy and relief. They rushed to the adults, climbing on them, rubbing against their scales, sharing memories telepathically. The matriarchs made soothing sounds, examining each hatchling carefully. But when Dennis turned to leave, Dawn broke away from the matriarchs and rushed back to him. The little one climbed up his leg and perched on his shoulder, chirping urgently. Frost followed, then Ruby, then the others. Within seconds, all 6 hatchlings had abandoned the matriarchs and surrounded Dennis protectively. The eldest matriarch's eyes widened. "Impossible. They have bonded with you, truly bonded, not simply imprinted. This has not happened in 10,000 years of our history." "How?" "I don't know," Dennis said honestly. "I just kept them safe, fed them, comforted them when they had nightmares. That's all." The youngest matriarch, whose scales were bright green with gold patterns, stepped closer. She extended her mind toward Dennis, and he felt her presence in his thoughts. She saw his memories, his lost family, his grief, his determination to protect the hatchlings at any cost. When she withdrew, there were tears in her ancient eyes. "He loved them," she said to the other matriarchs, "not as curiosities, not as political assets, as children." As his children. The middle matriarch with deep blue scales spoke firmly. "Nevertheless, they must return to our homeworld. They need proper education, proper culture, proper raising by their own kind." Dennis felt the hatchlings' distress spike. They pressed closer to him, and Dawn sent him a clear telepathic message. "Stay. Safe. Home." "They don't want to leave," Dennis said quietly. "They are children," the blue matriarch replied. "They do not understand what is best for them." The eldest matriarch held up a clawed hand for silence. She studied Dennis and the hatchlings for a long moment. Finally she spoke. "There are traditions that must be honored, but there are also unprecedented circumstances that demand new wisdom. These young witnessed their mother's murder. They survived alone for days. They found sanctuary with a species not their own, and they formed a bond that should not exist. Every precedent we have is inadequate for this situation." Ford, who had been standing nearby under guard from colonial defense forces, laughed bitterly. "You're actually considering leaving Dracovian heirs with a human farmer?" "The council will never allow it." The eldest matriarch turned her gaze on Ford. "You murdered Ambassador Kesavara. You attempted to murder her children. You have no voice in this discussion. When we return to our homeworld, you and your accomplices will face justice. The Trade Sovereign Government will answer for this crime, and the treaty Kesavara died for will pass in her honor, enforced by Dracovian military strength if necessary." Ford's expression crumbled. His entire conspiracy had failed. The hatchling survived. The truth was public, and now he would pay the price for assassination. The eldest matriarch returned her attention to Dennis. "You have proven yourself worthy of trust, but raising Dracovian young is not simple. They will grow large and powerful. They will develop abilities you cannot fully understand. They require guidance in our ways, our traditions, our mental disciplines. Can you provide that?" "No," Dennis admitted. "But I can love them. I can keep them safe. I can give them a home where they feel protected while they heal from what happened to their mother." "Isn't that what they need most right now?" The 3 matriarchs conferred telepathically. Dennis could feel the weight of their decision pressing down like a physical force. The future of 6 young lives hung in the balance. Finally, the eldest spoke. "We will grant you temporary custody. 1 galactic year. A teacher will be assigned to live nearby and provide education in Dracovian culture. We will monitor the young's development closely. If at any time they show signs of harm or improper growth, they will be removed immediately. But for now, they may remain with their chosen guardian." Dennis felt tears on his face. The hatchlings sensed his emotion and piled on him, knocking him gently to the ground. They chirped and clicked and glowed with happiness. Dawn licked his face with her rough tongue, and Frost draped a wing over him protectively. The youngest matriarch, the green one, smiled. "I will be the one to stay and teach. My name is Insara. I believe we have much to learn from each other, Dennis Walsh." As the sun set over Haven's Ridge, Dennis sat surrounded by 6 baby dragons and 3 ancient matriarchs. Ford and his team were being taken into custody. The galaxy was learning the truth about Ambassador Kesavara's death, and somehow impossibly Dennis had become a father again. The hardest part was over. Now came the real challenge of raising 6 alien children who would one day grow large enough to swallow his barn whole. But Dennis found himself smiling. He had loved and lost before. He had survived grief that should have destroyed him, and now he had a second chance to be the parent his heart still needed to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight his family was safe, and that was enough. The galactic news networks would not leave Dennis alone. For 2 weeks after the broadcast, journalists from 100 different species camped outside his property, trying to get interviews and images of the Dracovian hatchlings living with a human farmer. Dennis refused them all. The children had been through enough without becoming a public spectacle. Matriarch Insara proved invaluable during those chaotic days. She erected a barrier around the property using Dracovian technology that prevented unauthorized surveillance. Any attempt to scan or photograph the farm resulted in corrupted data. The journalists eventually gave up and focused on the political firestorm instead. And what a firestorm it was. Lieutenant Ford's arrest led to a cascade of revelations. Investigators discovered the conspiracy reached far deeper than anyone suspected. The trade sovereign government had paid Ford and his team to eliminate Ambassador Kesavara. But they were not working alone. Officials in 2 other governments had provided intelligence and support. Dozens of people across multiple species had participated in the assassination. The trial became the most watched event in galactic history. Ford tried to justify his actions by claiming the treaty would have caused economic collapse. His defense argued he was a patriot protecting his people's interests. But the prosecution showed communication logs proving Ford knew he was murdering children along with the ambassador. The jury, composed of representatives from 12 neutral species, convicted him in less than an hour. The sentence was life imprisonment on a penal colony so remote that escape was impossible. His accomplices received similar punishments. The trade sovereign government faced economic sanctions that would cripple their economy for decades. The 2 other governments involved lost their seats on the Galactic Council. But the most significant consequence was the treaty itself. The Dracovian Council announced they would enforce Ambassador Kesavara's vision personally. Any species that violated the terms would face military action from one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. 3 species that had been on the edge of war for decades suddenly found themselves bound by peace, whether they wanted it or not. Ambassador Kesavara had died for that treaty. Her death made it unbreakable. Through all of this, Dennis focused on the 6 children who now lived in his barn. Well, not just the barn anymore. Matriarch Insara had helped him expand the space using Dracovian construction techniques. The barn was now 3 times its original size, with special chambers for each hatchling, a central gathering area, and temperature controls that kept everyone comfortable. Insara herself lived in a small dwelling built beside the barn. She spent her days teaching the hatchlings about Dracovian history, language, and mental discipline. Dennis would often find her surrounded by all 6 children, sharing telepathic images of their homeworld and ancestors. The lessons were beautiful to observe even if Dennis could not fully participate, but the evenings were his time with them. After Insara finished teaching, Dennis would take the hatchlings on walks around the property. They were growing quickly now, already twice the size they had been when he found them. Frost reached up to his chest. Ruby could knock him over with an enthusiastic greeting. Copper had learned to fly short distances, gliding from the barn roof to the ground with increasing confidence. Each hatchling developed a distinct personality. Frost remained the natural leader, organizing her siblings and making sure everyone followed Dennis's rules. Ruby asked constant questions about everything, her curiosity insatiable. Copper played pranks, hiding tools and surprising people by dropping from above. Silver watched and learned before trying anything new, the cautious thinker of the group. Shadow had overcome much of his fear, and now explored confidently, though he still preferred quiet corners. Dawn stayed closest to Dennis, following him everywhere and sleeping curled against his side every night. The bond between Dennis and the hatchlings deepened daily. He could sense their emotions clearly now, even from a distance. When one of them felt sad, he felt it too. When they were happy, their joy flooded through him. It was exhausting sometimes, but he would not trade it for anything. Helen Brody visited weekly, bringing supplies and handling the administrative nightmare of Dennis's new situation. Apparently, fostering alien royalty required a mountain of paperwork. She handled it all with patient efficiency, while also becoming a beloved aunt figure to the hatchlings. They would rush to greet her vehicle whenever she arrived, chirping excitedly and showing off new abilities they had learned. Yuki contacted frequently as well, documenting the unprecedented cross-species bond for scientific purposes. She arrived in person 1 month after the revelation, carrying scanning equipment and observation tools. "This is remarkable," Yuki said while watching Dennis teach the hatchlings how to plant crops. "The bond isn't just emotional. It's neurological. Your brain patterns are synchronizing with theirs. You're developing new neural pathways that allow you to process their telepathic communication. In another few months, you might be able to share complex thoughts, not just emotions." "Is that dangerous?" Dennis asked, unknown. "Nothing like this has been studied before. But the hatchlings seem healthier than they should be. Dracovian young who lose their mother typically suffer severe developmental problems. These 6 are thriving. They're hitting developmental milestones ahead of schedule. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Nasera emerged from the barn with her characteristic grace. "The human concept of love is different from ours. We Dracovians protect our young fiercely, but we maintain emotional distance to prepare them for independence. Humans form deep attachments. They make their children part of themselves. I believe this is what accelerates the young's healing. They do not feel like orphans. They feel like they belong to a family." "They do belong to a family," Dennis said simply. "Mine." And Sarah smiled, an expression that looked strange on her reptilian face but was somehow warm. "Yes, I report this to the council regularly. The eldest matriarch is pleased with their progress. She has extended your custody indefinitely, as long as conditions remain favorable." That evening, Dennis sat with all 6 hatchlings and watched the sunset. They had made this a daily ritual. The children would settle around him, their scales glowing softly in the fading light, and they would share their feelings about the day. It was their bonding time, their moment of peace. "Your mother would be proud of you," Dennis said quietly. "All of you. You survived something terrible, and you're becoming strong and brave. She gave her life for peace. You're her living legacy." Frost projected an image into his mind. Ambassador Kesavara standing in sunlight, her scales magnificent, her expression kind. Then the image shifted. Kesavara stood beside Dennis, both of them watching the 6 hatchlings play. The ambassador nodded to him in approval, then faded like morning mist. Dennis wiped tears from his eyes. "Thank you for sharing that." Dawn chirped and pressed against him. The others moved closer, forming their protective circle. In that moment, Dennis understood something profound. These children had lost their biological mother, and he had lost his biological children. But family was not just about blood or species. It was about love, protection, and the choice to care for each other no matter what. Over the following weeks, more changes came. The Dracovian Council announced a new program inspired by Dennis's situation. Dracovian orphans from across the galaxy could now be fostered by families of other species, provided they passed strict requirements and received proper cultural education. The program would be experimental, carefully monitored, but it represented a fundamental shift in Dracovian society. Other species began reaching out to Dennis as well. A coalition of governments asked if he would be willing to foster war orphans from their populations. Dennis had to decline. 6 Dracovian hatchlings were more than enough for one farmer. But he helped establish guidelines for other humans who wanted to participate in fostering programs. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy shifted. Previously, they had been seen as clever but relatively weak, lacking the technology or military power of older civilizations. Now they were seen as uniquely capable of cross-species empathy. Where other species saw political assets or potential threats, humans saw children who needed love. Requests flooded human colonies. Could humans mediate this dispute? Could they help rehabilitate these traumatized populations? Could they foster these abandoned young? Humanity found itself with a new role in galactic society, not as warriors or merchants, but as caregivers and bridge builders between species. Dennis watched this transformation with mixed feelings. He was glad his actions had positive consequences. But he worried about humans who might take on more than they could handle, or who might have the wrong motives. Fostering was not about gaining status or making political statements. It was about genuinely caring for vulnerable lives. He shared these concerns with Sarah one evening while the hatchlings slept. "You are wise to worry," the matriarch said, "but your species has something most others lack. You feel compassion instinctively, without needing logical justification. This can be dangerous if misused, but it can also heal wounds that logic cannot touch. Trust your people to learn as you have learned. I just don't want those children to suffer because humans rush into something they don't understand. Then teach them. Share what you have learned. Become the example others can follow." Dennis considered this. He had spent weeks avoiding attention, refusing interviews and public appearances. But maybe that was selfish. Maybe other potential foster parents needed to hear from him, to understand what they were committing to. "All right," he said. "I'll do one interview, one honest conversation about what this really requires. If that helps others prepare properly, it's worth the discomfort." And Sarah nodded approvingly. "The young will understand. They know you act in service of others. It is a lesson they need to learn themselves." That night, Dennis lay in his bed with Dawn curled against his chest and shadows stretched across his feet. Through the telepathic bond, he felt the presence of all 6 hatchlings, their sleeping minds peaceful and content. He had given them safety and they had given him purpose. It was a fair exchange. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The interview would be difficult. The scrutiny would be uncomfortable. But Dennis had learned something important over the past months. Love required sacrifice, family required commitment, and protecting the vulnerable required courage. He had all 3 in abundance. Whatever came next, he would face it with 6 dragons at his side and a Dracovian matriarch as his ally. It was more than enough. 6 months had passed since the Dracovian Council granted Dennis permanent custody. The farm had transformed completely. What was once a simple agricultural property now served as the first official cross-species family home in galactic history. Reporters still showed up occasionally, but they kept a respectful distance. The story had evolved from breaking news to ongoing documentation of something genuinely new. The hatchlings were no longer small. Frost now stood as tall as Dennis's chest, her scales gleaming like winter ice in the morning sun. Ruby had developed the ability to generate small flames, which she practiced carefully under Sarah's supervision. Copper could fly for nearly an hour without rest, performing aerial acrobatics that made Dennis's heart stop with fear. Silver had begun demonstrating telepathic abilities that rivaled adult Dracovians, able to communicate complex ideas through images and feelings. Shadow had discovered a talent for camouflage, his scales adapting to match his surroundings almost perfectly. Dawn, still the smallest, had bonded so deeply with Dennis that they could share thoughts without conscious effort. The morning routine had become comfortable through repetition. Dennis woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast for 6 hungry dragons, then joined them for morning exercises. And Sarah had designed a training program that combined human physical activity with Dracovian mental discipline. The result was 6 young dragons who could meditate, perform basic martial arts, and understand both human and Dracovian philosophy. Breakfast this particular morning was interrupted by an incoming communication. Helen's face appeared on the screen, looking more stressed than Dennis had seen in months. "Dennis, we have a situation. There's a transport ship requesting emergency landing permission. They're carrying 5 orphans from the recent conflict in the outer reaches. Mixed species. All young. All traumatized. They need immediate placement. And the foster programs in the core worlds are completely overwhelmed." Dennis glanced at the 6 hatchlings who were eating massive portions of prepared meat and vegetables. They looked up at him with knowing eyes. Through the telepathic bond, he felt their collective response. "Help them, like you helped us. How soon can they arrive?" Dennis asked Helen. 2 hours. "I know this is sudden, but you're the only certified foster parent in this sector. The children have nowhere else to go. Tell them they can land. We'll make room." When the communication ended and Sarah approached Dennis with an approving expression, "The young suggested you accept before you spoke aloud. They are learning well. They're learning compassion. I guess they had a good teacher." They had you. The next 2 hours passed in controlled chaos. Dennis prepared a section of the barn for the new arrivals, while the hatchlings helped enthusiastically. Frost organized her siblings into work teams. Ruby used her flame ability to heat water for cleaning. Copper flew materials from storage to the barn. Silver telepathically coordinated everyone's efforts. Shadow scouted the property for potential hazards. Dawn stayed by Dennis's side, offering emotional support through their bond. When the transport landed, Helen emerged first, followed by 5 small figures. A Yarian child with blue fur and large eyes, a Kelnar with crystalline skin and trembling limbs, 2 Thranian siblings with feathered bodies and damaged wings, and a tiny human girl no more than 4 years old, clutching a torn blanket. All 5 children looked terrified, exhausted, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Dennis knelt to their level. "Hello, my name is Dennis. This is my farm and these are my children. You're safe here. Nobody will hurt you anymore." The human girl stared at him with hollow eyes. "My parents are dead. I know. I'm so sorry. My family died too a long time ago. It hurts and it will hurt for a while. But I promise you the hurt gets smaller, and you don't have to face it alone." Frost approached carefully, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. She lowered her massive head and touched her snout gently to the girl's hand. The child gasped, then tentatively stroked the dragon's scales. Frost purred, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to ease the tension in all 5 newcomers. The other hatchlings followed their leader's example. Ruby approached the Yarian child and demonstrated a small, harmless flame. The Yarian's eyes widened with wonder instead of fear. Copper performed a gentle aerial loop for the Kelnar, who managed a small smile. Silver shared peaceful mental images with the Thranian siblings, showing them a future where they could heal and fly again. Shadow led the human girl to see the barn's comfortable sleeping spaces. Dawn stayed with Dennis, sending waves of reassurance to all the frightened children. Over the next several days, Dennis learned each child's story. The Yarian named Pip had lost her family in a bombing. The Kelnar, called Shine, had been abandoned when his colony evacuated. The Thranian siblings, Whistle and Song, had watched their parents die protecting them from raiders. The human girl, Anna, had survived a transport crash that killed everyone else aboard. Each story broke Dennis's heart. But each story also strengthened his resolve. These children needed exactly what the hatchlings had needed months ago: safety, comfort, love without conditions, a chance to heal and grow. Sarah proved invaluable in managing 11 children of 5 different species. She established routines that accommodated everyone's needs: morning meditation for mental health, physical activities suited to different body types, cultural education. So each child understood their own heritage, and most importantly, family time where species did not matter and everyone was simply part of the same protective circle. The hatchlings took their roles as older siblings seriously. Frost became the protector, always watching over the smaller children. Ruby entertained them with flame displays and stories. Copper taught them to play, chasing and tumbling in ways that made them forget their trauma briefly. Silver helped them process difficult emotions telepathically. Shadow showed them hiding spots and secret places when they needed solitude. Dawn led by example, demonstrating trust in Dennis and encouraging others to trust as well. Anna particularly bonded with Dawn. The small human girl and the young dragon were inseparable within days. They slept curled together, ate side by side, and communicated through a mix of words and feelings that transcended language barriers. Watching them gave Dennis hope that healing was truly possible. 3 weeks after the new children arrived, Yuki visited to conduct follow-up studies. She spent an entire day observing the family dynamics, taking notes and recording measurements. "This shouldn't work," she said to Dennis that evening. 11 children from 5 species, all traumatized, all with different needs. The statistical probability of successful integration is nearly 0, but you're succeeding. They're all thriving. "It's not complicated," Dennis replied. "They just need someone who cares more about them than about the difficulties they represent. Everything else follows from that. But how do you manage the exhaustion, the constant demands, the emotional weight of their collective trauma?" Dennis looked across the property where 11 children played together in the twilight. The hatchlings were teaching the others a game that involved flight, telepathy, and teamwork. The newcomers were laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time since their arrival. I manage because they're worth it. Every difficult moment, every sleepless night, every challenge, they're worth all of it. Yuki smiled. The galactic foster programs are expanding rapidly because of your example. 200 families across 12 species have opened their homes to orphans. That's 200 children who have a future because you showed everyone what was possible. I just did what anyone should do when they find children in need. No, Dennis. Most people would have contacted authorities and let bureaucracy handle it. You chose personal responsibility over convenience. That's why you're special. That night, Dennis gathered all 11 children for their evening ritual. They sat together watching the sunset, sharing their feelings about the day. Pip talked about missing her parents but feeling grateful for her new family. Shine demonstrated how his crystalline skin could refract light in beautiful patterns. Whistle and Song practiced their damaged wings with renewed hope. Anna told Dawn a story about her mother, keeping the memory alive by speaking it aloud. The 6 hatchlings shared their own memories of their mother, Ambassador Kesivara. They projected images of her strength, her wisdom, her vision of a peaceful galaxy. Then they projected an image that made Dennis weep. Kesivara and Dennis standing together, both watching over 11 children of mixed species who played without prejudice or fear. You honor her memory, Dennis said quietly, by growing strong, by helping others, by choosing compassion over bitterness. She would be so proud. Frost pressed against him. Ruby rumbled contentedly. Copper landed on his shoulder. Silver touched his mind with love. Shadow curled at his feet. Dawn climbed into his lap, and Anna climbed in beside her. The other 5 children moved closer, forming a circle that encompassed everyone. In that moment, Dennis understood the true meaning of family. It was not about biology or species or shared history. It was about choosing to love, about choosing to protect, about choosing to build something beautiful from the wreckage of loss. 2 months later, the Galactic News Networks broadcast a special report. The cross-species foster program had expanded to 50 worlds. Over 1,000 orphans had found new families. Diplomatic relations between formerly hostile species had improved because their children now played together in integrated households. Violence had decreased in conflict zones because fighters realized their enemies were fostering their orphans. The report featured interviews with dozens of foster families, but it kept returning to one farm on Havens Ridge, where a human farmer lived with 6 young dragons and 5 children of other species. The images showed a family that should not exist by any logical standard, yet there they were, thriving together. The final image of the report became iconic across the galaxy. Dennis Walsh sitting on his porch at sunset, surrounded by 11 children of 5 species. All of them were smiling. All of them were safe. All of them were home. The reporter's closing words resonated with billions of viewers. Humanity asked for nothing but offered everything. They saw children where others saw political complications. They felt compassion where others calculated costs. They built families where others saw only chaos. Perhaps this is humanity's true gift to the galaxy, not technology, not military might, but the simple revolutionary belief that love transcends every boundary we construct. Years later, when the 6 hatchlings had grown into magnificent adults who served as ambassadors themselves, they would speak of their childhood on that farm. They would tell younger generations about the human who found them in a barn and chose to protect them when the entire galaxy seemed bent on their destruction. And every single one of them would say the same thing. Dennis Walsh was not just their guardian. He was their father in every way that mattered. He taught them that family was a choice, that love was an action, and that protecting the vulnerable was the highest calling any being could pursue. The barn where it all began still stood on the farm, now preserved as a historical site. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see where the first cross-species family was born, where a simple farmer changed the course of galactic society by refusing to abandon 6 frightened children. The plaque outside the barn read, "Here love proved stronger than politics. Here compassion overcame calculation. Here one human showed the galaxy that family knows no borders, no species, no limits. Here we learned that the measure of civilization is not power, but the care we give to our most vulnerable." Dennis never sought recognition for what he did. He never considered himself a hero. When asked about his legacy, he always gave the same answer. "I just opened my barn to some children who needed shelter. They did the rest. They healed, they grew, they thrived. All I did was give them room to become who they were always meant to be. But to 11 children across 5 species, he was everything. He was safety when the universe felt dangerous. He was love when loss threatened to consume them. He was home when they had nowhere else to turn. And that ultimately was humanity's gift to the stars. The ability to look at any frightened child regardless of species and see not a stranger or a burden or a political complication. Just a child who needs love. And humans, for all their flaws and limitations, knew how to give that freely, completely, without reservation. The galaxy was better for it.